I'd like to thank you all for coming. The fact you're willing to give up 8 hours on a Friday night to come and listen to me speak. I'm only joking. It's about 10 hours. The information I'm going to give you today is going to turn everything that you think you know about nutrition on its head. Everything we've been taught and led to believe in regards to nutrition is completely upside down. There are pieces of advice that I'll give you tonight that can change your health and well-being forever. So who am I? Before I explain who I am, I think it's important to understand who I used to be. So this used to be me, Richard Smith. That part hasn't changed. Nobody ever laughs at that. So Richard Smith, I was clinically obese, I was diabetic, I suffered with daily debilitating migraines, chronic fatigue, arthritic pains, depression and anxiety. In my mid to late 20s, I could barely walk up the stairs without stopping or being severely out of breath. I suffered severely with anxiety, which would quite often prevent me from leaving my house. In fact, to the point that if there was somebody walking in the street or there was a car driving in the street, I was unable to leave my house and go to my car, despite it being sort of 2 feet away on the drive. Many used to think that I was rude, but it was more to do with feeling unworthy of the company of others, as sad as that sounds. So it was quite debilitating. So with a show of hands, how many of you can relate to any of the things on the board there? So I should imagine quite a lot of us. So these are things that control our life, and we tend to take them for granted, as I did. I put a lot of this down to getting older. I put it down to my genetics, and the truth is, I was completely wrong, and I couldn't have been further from the truth. So despite trying every sort of diet and lifestyle that you could think of, I had days and spells where I would eat healthy foods, but I did try to be healthy. I was eating off the eat well plate and off the food pyramid, and these things just further exacerbated my illnesses. I put further weight on, I became more unwell, so I didn't really know what to do. But I knew that bread bloated me, so I thought I'd begin there. So I began with restricting bread, and anything sort of coated in bread. So breadcrumbs, chicken nuggets, that sort of thing. Over the course of 4 weeks, I lost 28 pounds. Now my intention wasn't to lose any weight per se. I just knew that bread bloated me, made me feel uncomfortable, and I thought if I can reduce that bloat, it would at least give the illusion that I wasn't so overweight. And it would make me feel a little bit better when I looked in the mirror. I looked in the mirror and I hated what I saw. I had no confidence, and it controls your life. It puts you into an awful sort of position. So that's what I started. I took bread out. I bumped into a friend of mine sort of soon after that I hadn't seen for quite a long time, and he was astonished with the amount of weight that I'd lost. So I told him what I'd been doing, and he mentioned ketosis to me, or the keto diet, keto lifestyle. Now, to me, that was a swear word. I'd never heard of it before. I thought I was restricting carbohydrates that much that I must be ketogenic. So I went away, I'd done a little bit of research, and I ended up testing on these little urine test strips to see what my blood ketones were. And I was not in ketosis. So despite restricting all these carbohydrates, I still wasn't producing ketones. It took me a further 2 weeks to become ketogenic. And I'm not going to lie, they were the worst 2 weeks of my life. I genuinely thought I was going to die. I'm not selling this very well, am I? And there are reasons for it. Sugar's a drug, and it's more addictive than heroin. And you quite often hear the term, listen to your body. If there's one time not to listen to your body, it's when your body's craving a drug. So I carried on my journey for the next 2 weeks. And I remember I went to bed one night, and I said to Amanda, and I genuinely meant this, I said, look, will you come up and check on me in 20 minutes because I think I'm going to die? And I genuinely meant it. That's how ill and unwell that I felt. I didn't die, obviously. I'm standing in front of you. And I woke up the next day feeling like $1 million. It was the best I'd ever felt. My energy was through the roof, and all of these ailments had gone away. Over the course of the 12 months, I'd lost 107 pounds, reversed diabetes. I was now migraine-free. And the migraines for me were the worst thing because these migraines were absolutely debilitating. So I'd get migraines every day to the point that I would go blind if I didn't take my medication. I had a constant headache, and it's a headache that I learned to live with. So this banging sensation in my brain continuously that you almost forget is there. It's that point where I lost my vision and became blind that I was unable to do things in life. And it affected everything. It affected me going places. It affected my job. So that was the biggest upside for me. My energy was now through the roof. These arthritic pains that I used to suffer with had dissipated. And depression, anxiety, I think these are things that you can't get rid of. I think these are things that are on a scale, at least for me. But whereas they were all encompassing before and they took over my life and I was unable to do things, I managed to sort of squash these things right down, and I was unable to leave my house. I was able to go places. I certainly wouldn't be standing in front of you guys here today if I still felt the same way. So I felt that I had learnt a secret that had changed my life. These things that I felt that were genetic and due to age, they weren't. It was to do with the foods that I was putting into my mouth. So I wanted to spread the word. I quit my job. I sold my house. So I went from being clinically obese, diabetic, suffering with these debilitating migraines that would make me blind, suffering from depression, anxiety, arthritic pains. And I became the number one in my category in 3 to 4 years. So this is what I do now. I've dedicated my life to helping others, and this is why I'm here today. I'm here today to tell you about my secret and the journey that I've been on, and hoping that you can at least take away some of the information that's going to help you sort of progress with your health and well-being. And it's in order to help others, and this is why I do what I do. So that's enough of my story. Let's crack on. So I'm going to tell you a little story, and these are the characters in my story. So we've got the macronutrients, the hormones, and the drivers of illness. Some of you may be familiar with these, and some of you may not. It doesn't matter because I'm going to talk you through them. So this is how the standard diet looks. It's high in carbohydrates, low to medium protein, and little to no fat. It's predominantly carbohydrate based. Now, when it comes to weight gain and weight loss, there are two theories. So we've got the calories in, calories out theory, the caloric theory, and we've got the endocrine theory, or the hormones. Now, we all know, we all have one of those crazy friends that tells us that just no matter what they're doing, no matter how little they eat, they can't lose any weight. And they blame it on their hormones. And we quite often think, well, no, you're just smashing them pies in the middle of the night at 2 in the morning. But I'm going to tell you that it is the endocrine system. Weight gain and weight loss is controlled by our hormones. The caloric model is encompassed inside the endocrine system. So calories need to be accounted for, but they're not the be-all and end-all. So that crazy friend that we often thought was stuffing their face when nobody was looking may not be so crazy after all. So regardless of what diet or lifestyle that you decide to live, I think you'll all agree that sugar is the enemy. So this is sugar. This is sugar. All of these are sugar too. All carbohydrates break down into sugar. And this is how it works. So when we consume carbohydrates break down into glucose. Glucose is then stored in the liver and muscle as glycogen. And then when the glycogen stores are full, it overspills, and we store that glycogen as fat. And this is the process that it goes through. So these triglycerides, when we consume carbohydrates, we get a spike in insulin. Now this insulin upregulates an enzyme called lipoprotein lipase, which breaks these bonds on the glycerol backbone and allow fatty acids to diffuse into the fat cell, and allowing the glycerol to transport into the fat cell through the GLUT4 transporter. So it's insulin that does this. So when we consume carbohydrates, we get a spike in insulin, and insulin breaks these bonds and allows us to store fat. So insulin stores fat. Now this is a normal process. So this is a process that we go through our entire existence. When we eat fat, we store fat to use for fuel at a later date. Now, to utilize this fat for fuel, we've got to perform this in reverse. So we need this enzyme called hormone-sensitive lipase. This breaks these back bonds again and allows fatty acids to diffuse into the bloodstream so we can use for energy. The problem is, when we consume carbohydrates and insulin is elevated, insulin blocks hormone-sensitive lipase. It blocks our ability to utilize fat for fuel. So now not only is insulin causing us to store fat, but it's preventing the body from utilizing it for fuel. Insulin is a storing hormone. It wants to store fat. Vegetable oils. We are told that vegetable oils are good for us, and we're told that they're heart healthy. They're not good for us, and they're not heart healthy. Vegetable oils don't come from vegetables, they come from seeds. Vegetable oils are high in an omega-6 called linoleic acid. Linoleic acid signals the body to store fat. So oxidized omega-6 causes inflammation and damages the liver, leading to further insulin resistance. So now, not only do we have the effect of the carbohydrates that we're eating, we're having the effect of these seed oils, these so-called heart-healthy seed oils that we're eating, also causing us to store more fat. And this is the study that sort of points it out. So a high omega-6 intake is associated with weight gain in both animals and human studies. And as a side note, high omega-6 fatty acids increase leptin resistance, which is something else we'll talk about a little bit later on. Vegetable and seed oils tell the body to store fat. Saturated fats don't do this, and omega-3s don't do this. Now, the problem is you may be thinking that you don't eat a lot of vegetable oils, except almost everything in the supermarket contains vegetable oils. Anything with a shiny packet or anything that's marked to be low fat or healthy, whether it's little health bars to your Pringles and your cakes, almost everything in the supermarket contains these vegetable and seed oils. Grains. We're also told that grains are good for us. We quite often wake up in the morning, we'll have a bowl of muesli or our oats, and we're told that these are heart healthy. But grains are high in lectins. Now, lectins cause up to 5 times more fat storage than insulin itself. So this study looks at the effect of insulin against storing fat. And at the top here, we've got wheat germ agglutinin. The effect on fat storage is 5 times higher from wheat germ agglutinin, from the lectins in these grains, than it is from the insulin itself. So we're eating these foods that we believe are healthy. And not only are we getting the insulin spike, but we're also getting the effect, the fat storage effect from the lectins as well. When we consume food, we get the release of a hormone called leptin. Leptin is a satiety hormone. It tells us when we're full. Except lectins block leptin. Lectins block our body's ability to tell us that we've eaten and that we're full. So these grains, we feed grain to cattle to fatten them up. Why would we think that eating them ourselves is going to have a different impact? I'm glad somebody laughed at that one. So when we consume these foods, they need to be absorbed through the microvilli in our gut. So a microvilli are these little finger-like things lying in our gut, and we've got all of this sort of surface area to absorb these nutrients. So these nutrients come into the system, they bind these microvilli, and we absorb the nutrients. This is how we get the nutrients from our food. Except when we consume these lectins like wheat germ agglutinin, phytohemagglutinin, they bind to receptor sites on the microvilli, and they block our ability to absorb nutrients. So instead of having all of this sort of surface area to absorb these nutrients, these lectins have sort of caused this. So now we've got a much greater sort of reduced surface area to absorb nutrients. So now, not only are we having this sort of fat storage effect, and we're getting the effect on leptin blocking our sort of satiety, but now we're also getting the effect of malabsorption. We're blocking our body's ability to absorb nutrients. So what do you think happens when you're consuming food and you're not getting the nutrients you need? You end up eating more. So this is a zoom out of the epithelial cells. When we consume these foods, these grains, these heart-healthy grains, high in lectins, they bind to the receptor sites of these epithelial cells, and when they do, they cause the release of a molecule called zonulin. Zonulin release causes a gap in the epithelial cells lying in the gut. This allows undigested protein molecules to travel into the bloodstream, where the body creates antibodies to fight them because they see them as foreign invaders, things that shouldn't be there. The problem with this is through a process called molecular mimicry, the body starts attacking other proteins in the body that look the same. This is autoimmune disease. So this intestinal permeability is autoimmune disease, and grains are one of the biggest sort of contributing factors to autoimmune disease. So I've probably thrown a lot of information at you there, so we'll summarize really quickly. So carbohydrates raise insulin. Insulin stores fat. Vegetable and seed oils create insulin resistance, causing further fat storage. Grains and seed oils cause inflammation, and they block leptin, which leads to the overconsumption, meaning we store more fat. Lectins cause 5 times more fat storage than insulin itself, and lectins block the absorption of other nutrients. Lectins damage the gut, leading to autoimmune disease. So these are my first 2 rules. So we haven't even covered sort of keto in any sort of level yet. And these are sort of pieces of information that you can take away today, whether you decide to go down the ketogenic route or not. These 2 keto rules, or health rules in general, if you can take these away and you can cut the grain and drop your vegetable and seed oils, you're going to see a massive increase in your health and well-being. Your body's going to be able to absorb these nutrients. You're not going to suffer with this insulin resistance, and you'll be a lot fitter and healthier for it. So these are my first 2 keto rules. Cut the grain and drop the seed oils. So coming back to this whole hypothesis that the caloric value, the calories in, calories out, we all seem to be obsessed with calories in, calories out, and everybody tracks calories daily. As I said earlier, it's not the calories that cause us to store fat, it's the endocrine system. And this is one of the things that the caloric model doesn't account for. It doesn't account for the thermic effect of food. So protein spends 20 to 35% of its calories to digest and process that protein. And carbohydrates spend 5 to 10%, and fat spends 0 to 5%. So if you remember earlier, this is sort of the general eat well plate. This is the volume of nutrients that we're consuming. So it's high in carbohydrates, medium amount of protein, and little to no fat. Now, if we were to swap the carbohydrates with the protein, so if we were to make the value of the protein to the value of the carbohydrates based on a standard of so like 2,000 to 2,500 calories based in a day, our body would spend an additional 380 calories each day just to process that food. So this isn't even accounting for ketogenesis or anything else. This is purely down to the thermic effect of food. So if you were to eat the same amount of calories, but get them more from protein, your body would spend an additional 380 calories per day just to process those nutrients. And this is a study that highlights this. So this looks at lowering carbohydrates, and this establishes that lowering carbohydrate increased energy expenditure during weight loss. This increased the metabolic rate. So they split people into 3 groups. They had the low carbohydrate, medium carbohydrate, and high carbohydrate. Now the difference between the low carb and high carb group, this study was isocaloric. So that the calories were the same. The amount of calories, the difference in the amount of calories spent was 278 between the high carb and the low carb group. So if we were to look at 278, if we were to play the caloric model at their own game and look at, they look at it as based on sort of 3,500 calories to gain or to lose a pound of fat. So if we were to play that at their own game, that 278 calories multiplied by 365 is 28 pounds. So if I was to clone myself and I was to put my other self on a high carb diet and I was to maintain on a low carbohydrate diet to the same caloric value, my other self would have to work off the better part of 2 stone just to be in the same position I am for not doing any work. Now that 3,500 sort of calorie per pound is rubbish, but this is just highlighting the fact that when we play it at their own game, that we're still able to burn sort of considerably more energy. We're able to increase our metabolic rate. So let's have a look at the further effect on carbohydrates on health. So when we consume carbohydrates, this elevates our glucose, our blood sugar. This raises our insulin, this increases our triglycerides, and increases our pattern B LDL. Now some of you may not know what that is, but we'll touch base on that a little bit later. And it also causes inflammation. As a reaction, this lowers our HDL, our so-called good cholesterol, and this leads to obesity, diabetes, arterial inflammation, cardiovascular disease, and hypertension. Now, if we were to cut out the carbohydrates, this decreases glucose. It improves insulin sensitivity. It lowers our triglycerides. It decreases our pattern B LDL, and now we have no inflammation. This leads to higher HDL, and suddenly now all of these other issues are no longer issues anymore. We no longer suffer with diabetes or obesity, arterial inflammation, cardiovascular disease. So it's one cause and one solution. And I could have listed a lot more there, but I don't think there would have been enough space on the page. So when we increase insulin, This leads to insulin resistance, and insulin resistance impairs our immune system. So this impairs our ability to fight off infections. So what you may be thinking is that, well, I'm not diabetic, I'm not insulin resistant. Almost everybody in this room is insulin resistant, bar sort of one or two of you. And the way to tell is the central sort of adiposity, the fat storage around the center area. If you have an overhang over your belt or your trousers, what they call the muffin top, this is a sign of insulin resistance. And what are you laughing at? See you all giggling there. So most of us are insulin resistant. So when we go to the doctor and we're looking at insulin resistance, they're not looking at our insulin levels, they're looking at our blood glucose. So the thing is that when we go to the doctor and our insulin levels are increasing, they're checking our glucose levels, except the more insulin resistant we become, the more the insulin that the body creates. So the body releases more and more insulin to drive these nutrients, this glucose into the cells. But it means that our glucose levels maintain at a steady rate, they stay in low. So when we're testing for diabetes, we're not showing to have insulin resistance to diabetes because insulin is upregulated and is keeping us in check. Except it gets to this point where it can't raise insulin anymore, and it's at this point that now our blood glucose levels begin to rise, and now you're diagnosed with diabetes. But this is now 10 to 15 years down the line. This started 10 to 15 years ago. So our immune system. So insulin reduces our immune system. It impairs our ability to fight off. I've picked on for no other reason other than the fact that we're going through a pandemic. So when we contract, it does nothing until it binds to a receptor site, and in the angiotensin converting enzyme 2 receptor, or the ACE2 receptor. We all have these receptors in our lungs and our heart and throughout the body. But if you're insulin sensitive, you don't have many of them. The problem with being insulin resistant is your body creates a lot more of these angiotensin converting enzyme 2 receptors, increasing your ability to be susceptible and contracting these. And the other thing with consuming these foods, this diet that's really high in carbohydrates, this increases our blood glucose levels and it leads to glycation. So when we contract, when it does actually go that far, we need cells in our body to fight them off. And in this case, I've referenced our natural killer cells. Except in an environment where we are consuming lots of carbohydrates and we have high blood glucose levels, this impairs the ability of the natural killer cells. It glycates the natural killer cells. It blocks their ability to fight off, massively reducing our ability to fight off any. So these foods are having a detrimental effect on your health. So these foods that we believe, again, are heart healthy and are good for us and are good for weight loss, they're having these impacts on our health behind the scenes that we're not sort of familiar with. So this is the Warburg effect. So cancer cells and tumor cells are fueled by glucose. They are metabolically inflexible. Cancer cells and tumor cells cannot be fueled by ketones. What is ketosis? It took a little while, didn't it? So ketosis is a metabolic state. It's our natural metabolic state. It's the metabolic state we're born in, and it's the metabolic state we've evolved in almost our entire existence. And this is how it works. So we can consume carbohydrates for fuel, or we can consume fats for fuel. By restricting our carbohydrates, this upregulates the amount of fat that we're using for fuel. This fat can come from dietary fat, or it can come from body fat. And we can manipulate this by manipulating the volume of fat that we can consume. To become ketogenic, we need three things. We need low insulin, we need elevated glucagon, and these sort of work against each other, and we need carnitine. So carnitine is produced naturally in the body, but it's also found in high quantities in animal proteins, particularly red meat. So if we need low insulin and elevated glucagon, it makes sense to look at the foods that are having the biggest impact on insulin, and this is carbohydrates. So this is the effect that carbohydrates have on insulin. It's a massive effect. compared to a moderate effect from protein and little to no effect on fat. So if we change these, if we drop the amount of carbohydrates that we're consuming, this is going to lower insulin. So if we concentrate more on our proteins and fats and come away from the carbohydrates, this is going to drop our insulin. So keto rule number 3, restrict your carbohydrates. So and this is how it works. So that diagram I showed you earlier about how fat is stored. When we consume carbohydrates, it breaks down into glucose. Glucose is stored in the liver and in the muscles as glycogen, and then it overspills to fat. So now that we've dropped our carbohydrates and now our insulin is coming down, this is allowing us to utilize our stored glycogen. So this glycogen, this glucose is stored in the muscles. Our bodies are now utilizing this. And it's until these have been depleted, can we now tap into the benefits of ketogenesis and begin breaking down fat for fuel. And this is how it works. So when we looked at the fat cell earlier, and we looked at the effect on carbohydrates blocking hormone-sensitive lipase, we've dropped the insulin. So insulin is now no longer blocking hormone-sensitive lipase. So now we can put these fatty acids into the blood. The fatty acids travel to the liver, where the liver converts them into ketones and sends them to the mitochondria in the cells, where the cells use them for energy. And it's as simple as that. So when we look at our average day sort of consuming carbohydrates, and a lot of you can probably attest to this. I remember when I used to work for an engineering company, I'd wake up in the morning and I'd have a bowl of muesli with a banana, which now looking back, I was technically adding sugar to my sugar. So we eat cereal in the morning, and this sort of does this. It gives us that little energy spike, and then soon after, we begin to crash again. So we're now sort of at 10 o'clock in work with your 10 o'clock cup of coffee, you're reaching for that biscuit, and now your energy's back up again, and soon after you're crashing again, and now lunchtime, you're reaching for your chicken breast with some pasta, and then your energy's back up again. 3 o'clock, you're crashing again, so with your 3 o'clock cup of coffee, you're looking for a cake or a biscuit, and then so your day on carbohydrates is spent spiking and crashing. But things are different when your body's producing ketones. When you're ketogenic, your energy is a lot higher, and it's supplied at a more sustainable rate. So instead of these massive sort of spikes and dips, your energy is considerably higher, and you do get these little dips, but these dips are less severe. So this is why I've put it into in an effect of a wave. So yesterday, for example, I drove up to Wolverhampton. We're sponsoring a team of MMA fighters up there. So I drove up there and I didn't have time to stop. And I'd eaten all day. I didn't get home until 11 o'clock. And I didn't eat at all day. I would have eaten, because I love my food. But I didn't feel the need to. So these crashes are much less severe. So when I was working for the engineering company that I used to work for before I quit my job and began Keto Pro, I remember sort of around about 3 o'clock that I would hunt down a small child because I was so hungry, you know. And that's how our day is spent on carbohydrates. We're sort of up here and we're down here again. But our energy on keto, once you go past the initial phase, the energy is a lot higher, and these dips, these peaks and troughs are a lot less severe. The downside to beginning a keto journey is the keto flu, and this is where a lot of people sort of fall down. So the keto flu is your body's going through a detoxification phase, but to understand how that works, we need to understand that high blood pressure or essential hypertension is an insulin-dependent state. It's caused through elevated insulin. So when we look at, we're quite often told by medical professionals to stay away, and as a society in general, to avoid our sodium. Sodium is essential for life. We can't live without it. And this study looked at, this covered 100,000 participants over 17 countries, and this measured the sodium excretion. So this is the amount of sodium that was excreted from the body. So we can assume that what was excreted was at least what was consumed. And what this shows is that the optimal sort of area here is between 4 to 6 grams of sodium, or 4,000 to 6,000 milligrams of salt. Anything below 2,000 milligrams, increased risk of death. So a massive increase in risk of all-cause mortality. Now, to get that sweet spot, that 4,000 to 6,000 milligrams of sodium per day, if you were to obtain that from table salt, because table salt is less than 40% sodium, you would need to consume 15 tablespoons of salt. So that's an awful lot of salt, and we're told to avoid it. Sometimes for good reason. A lot of processed foods are very high in salts, but when you become ketogenic, you're restricting all of these processed foods and you're eating real food, you're eating natural food, you're eating foods that don't naturally contain high levels of these electrolytes. So sodium is essential for life. When we begin a ketogenic journey, as I just showed you earlier, or even sort of low carb, this lowers our insulin. Now, the way that sort of essential hypertension works is that in an elevated insulin state, in a state of insulin resistance, we're told to sort of cut out this sodium. So we drop the sodium, but sodium is essential for life. So the insulin will pull sodium from 4 points in the nephrons in the kidney back into the blood to keep us alive. Wherever sodium goes, water follows, which leads to further sort of high blood pressure. And this is what's sort of happening when we begin a keto journey. So the drop in insulin signals the kidneys to release sodium from the body. This sodium is expelled, and we go through what's called the keto flu, also or used to be known as the Atkins flu. And this is where we get headaches, we feel nauseous, you can feel sick, really tired, and it's a whole world of unpleasantness. And this is where most people fail, and it's through poor preparation, it's through the lack of understanding how important these electrolytes are for us, these salts. Salts are essential for life. So this is my keto rule number 4. Consume lots of electrolytes. So these are the electrolytes that you guys have been drinking this evening. We believe to be one of the highest, best electrolytes on the market, one of the highest qualities. Now the natural sources, the 2 best natural sources in my opinion are the pink Himalayan and the Celtic sea salt. But wherever you decide to eat, if, whether you're supplementing with electrolytes or whether you're going down the route of using pink Himalayan or Celtic sea salt, you need to get lots of electrolytes in. White fat and brown fat. These are 2 types of fats that our body contains. When we're born predominantly with brown fat, so babies contain brown fat. White fat or white adipose tissue wants to store. Brown adipose tissue or brown fat wants to burn. So when a baby is born, they're predominantly brown fat, so their body is constantly burning fuel for energy. As we get older, our bodies hold a lot less brown fat and we store more white fat. When we become ketogenic, so in a state of low insulin and elevated ketones, a ketogenic state increases the activity of uncoupling protein 1, or UCP1. UCP1 tells our white fat to act in the way that brown fat does. And this is where the sort of magic of being ketogenic comes into play. So I'm stood here in front of you, and I'm basically burning, my body's wasting fat for fuel. My cells, through heat, are wasting fat, they're wasting energy for fuel. I'm also breathing out ketones, and I'm also peeing out ketones. Not at this second, obviously, because that wouldn't... But that's the beauty of being ketogenic. So your body is just continuously wasting energy for fuel. So these are 10 of the advantages of being ketogenic. I think we've sort of covered the insulin sensitivity there. We've gone through the process of explaining that a drop in carbohydrates is going to create a drop of insulin and make us more insulin sensitive. So it's going to boost insulin sensitivity. So let's take a look at the rest. Now to understand these, we need to understand a little bit more about the 3 ketone bodies. So the 3 ketone bodies are acetoacetate, beta-hydroxybutyrate, and acetone. Now the main one that we need to pay attention to is beta-hydroxybutyrate, or BHB. So BHB blocks a complex called NLRP3 inflammasome. NLRP inflammasome unleashes inflammatory molecules such as interleukins and cytokines responsible for much of the inflammatory signaling within the body. This includes neuroinflammation, cancers, insulin resistance, and Alzheimer's. So this is one of the benefits of producing ketones, having the presence of beta-hydroxybutyrate or BHB in the blood. So BHB, these, by the way, are the studies that I've referenced as well. So if we're recording this, and if you want to go back later when we publish it to YouTube or the website, all these studies are referenced. And I encourage you to do this. Don't take my word for it. There's a saying, isn't it? Trust the science. You don't trust the science. You question the science. That's what science is there for. Don't believe my word for it. I want you to go away and research this yourself. But when you do the research, you need to look at real clinical trials, clinical studies. Don't look at people's opinions on Facebook pages. You need to look at studies done by the BMJ and other sort of accredited institutions. So the creation of BHB or beta hydroxybutyrate within the body helps protect our cells against oxidative stress by increasing NAD plus to NADH ratio. Now, a lot of this might not mean much to a lot of you, but I'm going to run through it quickly and we can get on to some of the important stuff. So BHB crosses the blood-brain barrier and it supplies the brain with over 70% of its energy. So the fast absorption improves brain function, lowers neuroinflammation, lowers risk of dementia, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, as well as depression and anxiety. And this is why I saw an improvement in my depression and anxiety. Increase in heart function. BHB has been found to increase the mechanical efficiency of the heart by as much as 30%. I've gone in at 15 but to err on side of caution just in case you decide to look at the study, but it is closer to 30%. And increased blood flow as much as 75%. So not only now is this an advantage to everybody, but if you were an athlete, for example, an increase in mechanical efficiency of the heart and blood flow is going to see a massive improvement in your athletic ability. Gene expression. So gene expression is how the cells within the body interpret DNA instruction. BHB improves DNA expression by making important genes more available for expression. Improved athletic performance. We could go to town on this. I've done a couple of public speaking events about athletic performance, and I've just referenced a few studies there, but there's a lot of common misconceptions in regards to training and the need for carbohydrates to build muscle, the need for carbohydrates for energy. But I've just referenced a few here. So ketones, BHB, beta hydroxybutyrate, improves performance during endurance exercises by utilizing ketones for fuel. Ketones decrease fatigue, and they help block hydrogen ions, which are responsible for that burning feeling that you feel when you're training. So this isn't, we quite often call it lactic acid. Lactic acid doesn't exist in the human body, it's lactate. And lactate is an energy system. And being in a ketogenic state, it upregulates the lactic acid system. It upregulates the body's ability to send lactate to the liver and ship this back to the muscles for the muscles to use as glycogen. So what that means, in simple terms, is that an adapted ketogenic athlete can beat a carb athlete at their own energy system. Does that make a lot of sense? So we look at carbs as fuel and energy and needed for athletic performance. An adapted ketogenic athlete will upregulate the lactic acid system, beating a carbohydrate athlete at their own game. Studies have also shown that fat burning increases by 20 times during exercise when ketones are present in the blood. Prevents bone deterioration. This is something I've tried to hammer home to my mother because she suffers with osteoporosis. But do you know what? You guys have come out to listen to me blabber today, and trying to get your own family to listen and take your advice is an absolute nightmare. BHB prevents bone degradation by stopping the production of cells called osteoclasts. Osteoclasts break down bone tissue. And I put a side note in there that BHB may also strengthen our bones. Now, there's a lot of studies out there to back this up, but again, I've erred on the side of caution there because there's a lot of other factors that come into play when we look at strengthening bones. So there was one study that I was looking at in particular where they looked at a group of individuals that were over 65, and the people doing the study split them into different groups. And they had some on high protein, some on medium, and some on low. And what they found is that the group that were on high protein still managed to not just slow down the breakdown of bone, but they managed to rebuild and repair bone. And so bone is mineralized protein. So it makes sense that we need protein to build bone. But we also need other things too. We need sodium. And in fact, those are directly correlated. You can't increase bone density with just protein. You need to increase the sodium, so adding further sort of value to how important sodium is. And we need phosphate and calcium. But this just goes to show that we're told sort of beyond the age of 30, 35 that our bone degradation is on a downward spiral. But being ketogenic slows this and prevents further breakdown, and applying sort of other metrics by increasing your protein and sodium allows you to repair and rebuild bone. So we've already touched base a little bit on this, but and I know it's a bit of a taboo subject, but it helps fight and prevent cancers. And again, I've referenced the Warburg effect here, but being ketogenic can slow down the growth of tumours and cancers as their cells are metabolically inflexible. They cannot use ketones for fuel. They can only utilize glucose for fuel. So BHB has also been shown to kill pancreatic cancer cells and slow and shrink brain cancers by lowering blood glucose and IGF-1. So increasing lifespan, who doesn't want a bit of that? So BHB blocks the IGF-1 receptor gene. IGF-1 boosts cell cell growth and proliferation. Excess growth is linked to disease and early death. Lowering IGF-1 delays aging and increases lifespan. BHB also activates FOXO genes, which boosts antioxidant creation and increases longevity. So those are some of the other benefits that sort of come along with being ketogenic. So not only now are your energy through the roof, you've got this drop in insulin, so now you're more insulin sensitive, you're not storing this other fat. So people look at being ketogenic and the keto diet. It's called a fad. People look at it as a fad diet. I've lived this way for 8 years, and I get fitter and healthier every day. I do have days where I consume some carbs, not very often, and quite often it's to do more with experimenting and trying to see if I can further improve my performance by being dual fueled at the utilization of ketones and carbohydrates, but we certainly don't need carbohydrates in our diet whatsoever. So these are some of the main concerns. So ketoacidosis, gluconeogenesis, I can't build muscle without carbs. I'm an athlete, I need carbs for energy. Fasting, cholesterol, and saturated fats. So those are probably the elephants in the room, the cholesterol and saturated fats. Those are, I believe, to be the biggest concerns when customers and clients come to see me, or prospective customers and clients. Cholesterol is one of the biggest concerns. So let's have a look at ketoacidosis. So anybody within the medical community will be familiar with this. Insulin, we need insulin. Insulin is released when we consume carbohydrates, and this is what drives the glucose into the cell. But when insulin isn't present, insulin is unable to drive this glucose into the cell. So what do you think is going to happen when this cell isn't registering any energy? It needs energy from somewhere else. So it starts to ramp up the production of ketones. So now we've got an increase in blood glucose, and we've got an increase in ketones. This creates an acidotic state, which can be fatal. Except ketoacidosis only occurs in the absence of insulin. So even a type 1 diabetic can still maintain a ketogenic state with good insulin management. So ketoacidosis only occurs in the absence of insulin. So even a type 2 diabetic that can create that little bit of insulin, the second that insulin hits the system, it's going to do one of two things or both. It's going to prevent the elevation of insulin, and it's going to prevent the production of ketones. So basically allow you not to become in an acidotic state, allowing ketoacidosis not to occur. So nutritional ketosis is a metabolic state. It's our natural metabolic state. Ketoacidosis is the body's inability to control rising glucose and ketones due to lack of insulin. So again, even a type 1 diabetic, and I work with lots of them, as long as you've got good insulin management, you can still maintain a ketogenic lifestyle. So gluconeogenesis. This is probably the second biggest thing that I see in the Facebook groups and things. People are limiting their protein in fear of an elevation in insulin, resulting in them being pulled out of a ketogenic state. And that comes from gluconeogenesis. So gluconeogenesis is the conversion of protein and lipid into glucose. And as I just said, many fear that too much protein will pull them from a ketogenic state. However, this is false. Gluconeogenesis is demand-driven. It only happens when the body needs it to. So don't fear your protein. Protein is the most important macronutrient. So one for the athletes and anybody that trains in the room. So I can't build muscle without carbs. I don't eat carbs. I may not be the biggest person in the world, but I certainly don't have a problem building muscle. So this study looks at whether muscle protein synthesis was higher with the co-ingestion of carbohydrates with protein against protein alone. So basically, they measured the volume of protein and carbohydrates being consumed and seeing if the effect on building muscle was higher in the presence of carbs against zero carbs and just protein. And the results found that the effect on insulin, even though there was an elevation in insulin from the glucose, the results found that consuming carbohydrates along with protein did not improve muscle protein synthesis at all compared to the co-ingestion the ingestion of protein alone. So carbohydrates are not required to build muscle. But interestingly enough, when they performed this study looked at the co-ingestion of protein and fat, a ketogenic lifestyle. This randomized controlled trial shows that there was a greater stimulation of muscle protein synthesis when protein was consumed with fat. So we have the ability to build more muscle with fat compared to the co-ingestion of carbohydrates and protein. So as a society, whether you train or not, you wake up in the morning and you're looking to fuel your day. And the first thing we do is reach for that bowl of muesli, isn't it? Or that granola. We think we're being healthy and we're putting those carbs in. We're carb loading. And this is the same thing that a lot of athletes do or used to do. They're told to carb load before an event, before you go to the gym, before you do any activity, you consume lots of carbs because you're told that we need to carb load and we need carbs for energy. And this is the guy that told us to do it. This is Professor Tim Noakes. Tim Noakes literally wrote the book on carb loading. It's called The Law of Running. So anybody that does carb loading before a marathon, this is the guy that was telling you to do it. Anybody that trains in the gym and puts lots of carbs in before you hit the gym, this is the guy that told you to do it. Tim and another gentleman called Bruce Fordyce, they were the inventors or the original creators of the GU energy gels. So these are the energy gels that these marathon runners and these triathletes you'll see are consuming doing their runs to get more carbohydrates in. But in a recent interview, Tim Noakes said, "I apologize because that was completely wrong." So for 33 years, I was part of the problem, he said. Tim Noakes reversed his position on high carbohydrate diet in early 2011. Even though he was a runner and he used to run stupid amounts of miles, he didn't drink or smoke. He was now overweight and he was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. So this guy has changed his approach and his view on carb loading. So the guy that's telling you to put those carbs in to fuel your day, the guy that told you to fuel your events with carbohydrates is now telling you he had it wrong. And this guy literally wrote the book on carb loading. So if you can't take it from him, I don't know who you're going to take it from. So let's tie up what we've covered so far. Oh, sorry, this is fasting. So fasted, also referred to as time-restricted feeding, although different, are similar. So many implement fasting throughout the day. This involves not eating, and only drinking water and coffee for a set period and consuming food within a specific window. So this is what I tend to do on a daily basis. I don't eat for most of the day. It's not because I'm fasting on purpose. It's because I'm not hungry. I'm not coming in with all these sort of spikes and crashes. I don't feel the need to eat. The food that I consume is highly nutrient dense and my body's getting all the nutrients that I need, not to survive but thrive. So I implement fasting not because I want to achieve something out of it, although there are lots of benefits. I do it because I don't feel the need to consume. The goal of fasting is not to burn more calories per se, but rather to put the body into a state of autophagy. Autophagy is cellular repair, regeneration and recycling. The body cleans out old, sick, damaged and dying cells and recycles them into new, younger, stronger, fitter, faster ones. Keto and fasting work well together as the body has a constant supply of fat or fuel stored as fat. So you hear people who fast on carbohydrates and they struggle a lot more because their day is spent doing this again. They're metabolically inflexible. They can't utilize stored fat for fuel. But being ketogenic, it's almost like this switch. So that your body's flicking this switch. Instead of taking the energy from the food that we are consuming here, it's taking it from here. And our bodies, even the leanest person you know, carries around 150,000 calories stored as fat. So you're not going to go hungry. When you think you're starving, you don't know what starving is. You're hungry because your blood glucose is crashing on carbs and you're looking for that fix again. You're looking for that drug. But all of that is sort of dissipated when you become ketogenic. There's a constant supply of this fuel, a constant supply of this energy. So never overconsume following a fast, as this will lead to refeeding syndrome. So when you break a fast, consume little and consume from protein and fat sources. Avoid breaking a fast with carbohydrate-rich foods. So there are plenty of benefits to fasting, but make sure you break your fast the right way. So don't overindulge. Make sure you consume foods high in protein and high in fat, but start small. So this is the big topic, keto and cholesterol, or cholesterol and saturated fat. So we are told as a society that cholesterol is bad for us. We're told that it clogs our arteries and it's detrimental to our health. And this is a statement that was recently released. It was released in 2015 by the Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee. And they clearly state that cholesterol is not a nutrient of concern for overconsumption. Now this came from the people that told us in the first place to avoid cholesterol. They told us that saturated fat was bad for us and cholesterol was detrimental to our health. They're now telling us that it's not. Cholesterol is imperative for life. Cholesterol is essential for cell formation, cell communication, nutrient absorption, nutrient transportation. It's imperative for hormone production. It's essential for the immune system, and it's essential for healing. Cholesterol, just like our electrolytes, cholesterol is essential for life. Sorry, I should have warned you. This healing is something I can attest to myself. So I had an operation last year, and it meant that I had to leave the wound open, and it had to be packed on a daily basis. So I had to go back to my doctor or the nurses, and then they had this gauze and these pliers, and they were there doing this and stuffing and packing it into this wound. It's not the most pleasant of experiences, I can assure you. But I was told to expect a 12-week healing period. I was told that this was going to take 3 months to heal. In fact, the quickest that the nurses that had been treating me had seen a wound like this heal was about 10 weeks. Mine healed in a little over 3 weeks. And this is my cholesterol. Probably double what a lot of yours is. My cholesterol is double figures, and that is predominantly LDL. So my cholesterol is predominantly LDL cholesterol, the so-called touted bad cholesterol. So why are we told to fear cholesterol? We're told to fear cholesterol because in the fear of it clogging our arteries and leading to cardiovascular disease. But this isn't true. Cholesterol does not clog your arteries. Cholesterol isn't responsible directly for cardiovascular disease. So this image, these are 2 studies here that show the effect on carbohydrates on the glycocalyx. Now the glycocalyx is the arterial wall's first line of defense. So when we consume carbohydrates, what this diagram shows is the effect on the glycocalyx. The glycocalyx is completely destroyed. It completely wipes out our arterial wall's first line of defense. Now we are told to eat little and often. So we are constantly causing damage to the glycocalyx. The glycocalyx takes 8 to 12 hours to recover. So if we are continuously, constantly eating, that glycocalyx is never recovering. And this is another study that shows the effects. Again, and I'm not a hater of carbohydrates. I'm not anti-carbohydrate. I think there's a place for it, but I think as a society, we've gone down this like rabbit hole of basing our diet solely on carbohydrates. Everything we eat, even veg, lots of veg, certain veg in particular, is very high in carbohydrates. We need to be aware of the effect on carbohydrates on our health. So everything in moderation, whether you decide to go sort of down the keto route or maintain low carb or not, it's important that you understand that these foods that you're eating and the damage that it could potentially be causing. So these are 3 particles. We've got VLDL, IDL, and LDL. So VLDL, or very low density lipoproteins, circulate the body, releasing the lipid cargo along their travels in the same way that a bus would with passengers. So this particle is released from the liver and it circulates the body, dropping off its lipid cargo to repair the body. Now there's 3 particles there, but they're all one particle. This is the same particle along one journey. So this VLDL just keeps releasing its lipid protein, its lipid cargo, becoming smaller and smaller in size. LDL wants to heal the body. It doesn't want to damage the body. Why would the body create something naturally that's going to damage itself? Well, quite simply, it wouldn't. Now, the problem with LDL, or at least pattern B, so these 2 diagrams here show that, see this little yellow strand? This is called an ApoB100 receptor. So when the liver sends out these LDL particles to repair the body, when it circulates the body and comes back, it's this ApoB100 receptor that is like an access card. This is what allows LDL access back to the liver. Without it, the liver won't accept it back in and recycle it and send it back out again. But through the process of the overconsumption of carbohydrates, it causes this ApoB100 receptor to become glycated. Again, sugar binding to the receptor blocks this ApoB100 receptor and prevents its ability to go back into the liver, resulting in it circulating the body and increasing in number. Now this is the same sort of particle there. This ApoB100 receptor has become oxidized. So earlier we were looking at these vegetable and seed oils, which I said were high in an omega-6 called linoleic acid. Oxidized linoleic acid causes our LDL particles to become oxidized. So now we've got carbohydrates, which are causing our LDL particles to become glycated, and we've got these so-called heart-healthy oils. There's a bit of a strange twist, isn't it? These so-called heart-healthy oils are causing these particles to become oxidized. So these heart-healthy oils are causing us to damage our heart. So again, it's the overconsumption of carbohydrates and these vegetable and seed oils. So typically what happens is these go out, they get damaged, they're not allowed access back to the liver, so they circulate in number. We're consuming more carbohydrates, this glycocalyx is becoming damaged, and then these LDL particles are allowed access into the subendothelial space to repair the body. But these are damaged. These are damaged particles. Now, when they get into the subendothelial space, there's cells called macrophages. Now, these macrophages contain a receptor called a scavenger receptor. This scavenger receptor recognizes that damaged ApoB100 receptor where the liver didn't. And they pull them in. They basically say, you can come in. You can have access. And it engulfs all of these LDL particles, these damaged LDL particles, these glycated and oxidized LDL particles. It crams them in until it grows greatly in number, resulting in the creation of something called a foam cell. And it's this foam cell that is the beginning of atherosclerosis. It's this creation of the foam cell through the glycated and the oxidized LDL particles that is leading to cardiovascular disease. A healthy LDL particle doesn't do that. It doesn't get engulfed because it goes back to the liver for recycling. So this is the difference between our two main types of LDL, our pattern A and our pattern B. So our pattern A is healthy, and this is what my LDL is. My LDL is predominantly pattern A. Pattern A is non-glycated and non-oxidized, and pattern B is glycated and oxidized. So when you have your results from the doctor, you can request and see if yours are predominantly pattern A or pattern B. And there's an easier way to test. So when you get your results, if you run this through your results, it'll give you an indication of whether your LDL is predominantly pattern A or pattern B. So if your triglycerides are less than 0.5, then it's good. And there's a good chance that your LDL is predominantly pattern A. If your HDL is greater than 1.5, or your triglyceride to HDL ratio is less than 1, then all good. If you have a no to any of these or all of them, then it's quite likely that some or most of your LDL is pattern B. Again, just to reiterate that, this is through the overconsumption of carbohydrates and these so-called heart-healthy seed oils. So this paper included over 68,000 participants and looked at the relationship between high LDL and all-cause mortality, or the risk of death. So the results showed an inverse association between all-cause mortality and LDL, representing 92% of the participants. In other words, the lower your LDL, the higher your risk of death. Now this is a massive study. This is 68,000 people and 92% of the participants. So the lower your LDL, the higher your risk of death. So do not fear your saturated fats. So many of us still fear the consumption of saturated fats in fear of raising our LDL cholesterol. Despite this notion being around for over 50 years, there's very little scientific backing for it. So this is a double-blind randomized controlled trial that looked at heart disease in 3 groups: vegetable oils, olive oil, and saturated fats. The trial lasted 2 years, and what the results showed was that 5 people died in the vegetable oil group, 3 died in the olive oil group, and only 1 in the saturated fat group. Talk about a comeback story, isn't it? So this is why I cook in butter, tallow, lard, ghee. This is why I consume lots of saturated fats. So this study included over 2,000 patients. So by no means a small study. This was a study on a meta-analysis to question the association between dietary intake of saturated fatty acids and the risk of cardiovascular disease. And again, there was no association between dietary intake of saturated fats and cardiovascular disease. This is another study to further back this up. Now, this is one of my favorite ones. This was the Minnesota coronary artery experiment. So a lot of the misconception to do with what we've been told in regards to saturated fat come from a gentleman called Ancel Keys. Ancel Keys, he released a study called the 7-country study, and he had a hypothesis that the overconsumption of saturated fats led to cardiovascular disease. And when he done this study and released the evidence, it did indeed show that the more saturated fat you consumed, the higher your risk of death. What he didn't tell you is that there wasn't only 7 countries. The study encompassed 21 countries. The other 14 disproved his theory. So because it disproved his theory, he took them out, which is borderline criminal, I think, isn't it? So this is the same gentleman that took part in this study, so Ansel Keys. So this study included 9,423 patients, and they were split into 2 groups. One group had high saturated fat in the diet, and the other group replaced saturated fat with vegetable oils. So again, the so-called heart-healthy oils. Now, the reason they did this was to lower LDL and show that it improved your lifespan and your risk of cardiovascular disease. The study did indeed show that the oil using vegetable oils, the group using the vegetable oils had a lower serum cholesterol. So it did lower cholesterol. But this group had a higher mortality rate than the saturated fat group. In other words, this study showed, again, that the lower your cholesterol, the higher your risk of death. So saturated fats do not clog arteries. Heart disease is a chronic inflammatory condition. Inflammation and insulin resistance caused from the overconsumption of carbohydrates and these vegetable and seed oils. So my keto rule number 5, consume lots of natural fats and proteins. So just to reiterate, these are my 5 rules. So cut the grain and drop the seed oils. If there's only 2 pieces of information that you take away from here today, it's these 2. If you can cut your grain and drop the seed oils, or at least massively reduce the amount of grain and seed oils that you were consuming, you're going to see a massive increase in your health and well-being. You're going to have a lot more energy. You're going to be a lot healthier and fitter. So if there's just the 2 pieces of this that you take away today, it is these 2. So the rule number 3, to becoming ketogenic, in my opinion, and a lot of people put this at number 1 because you do need a reduction in carbohydrates to become ketogenic. But I know that my lifestyle isn't going to suit everyone. I think it could, but I also know that we all live different lives. Some people want to consume carbs and some don't, but this is the reason that I put the other 2 sort of number 1 and 2, because in my opinion, you're going to see the biggest sort of health benefits from those first 2 rules, and that's why they're more important to me. But keto rule number 3, restrict your carbohydrates. Number 4, consume lots of electrolytes and consume lots of natural fats and proteins. Implement fasting if you'd like. Fasting is not starving yourself. Eat when you're hungry. This is a lifestyle, not a fad. Eat meat, eggs, fish and cheese, along with lots of natural fats, with any vegetables that grow above the ground, should you wish to do so, while avoiding grains. Fats and proteins supply the body with all the nutrients we need. They fill us for longer, and this will help you avoid snacking and will help limit the number of times that you eat throughout the day. So there it is. I call these keto foods. I'm quite often sort of pulled up when I'm talking to friends, family, clients and customers. I'm calling these keto foods. These are real foods. And in fact, a lady put on the keto group, on my keto group today, she called a lot of the foods that we buy in supermarkets Franken foods. As in Frankenstein, if you did. And it's true, a lot of these foods that we're consuming, that we believe to be foods, they're not foods. These are real foods. It's taking things back to basics, just restricting those greens. Eat lots of meat, eggs, fish and cheese. So my final thoughts. So in my opinion, and as the research tells us, eating the way our ancestors did and living a ketogenic lifestyle, consuming lots of saturated fats and proteins from high-quality, grass-fed animal sources, while heavily restricting or completely removing processed foods, grains, vegetable and seed oils high in linoleic acid, is the best way to keep a healthy immune system and prevent chronic illness, autoimmune issues, inflammation, glycation, oxidative stress, and cardiovascular disease. Thank you.